want to thank you for joining People's Visioning today. We're very happy to be back with you. And we're going to be talking about the issues today. We have another guest to introduce and help you get acquainted with today. I know we've invited a few different candidates to showcase for you and to learn both about them and through them the issues that we're dealing with that all of us are really care very much about, and there's quite a number of issues that folks are very concerned about these days, and so we want to welcome you again to joining our People's Visioning program. And because there's so much to talk about, we're going to just try to get right to the issues and help just remind you, though, that People's Visioning is an organization that is very grassroots, very local, and works on all these issues as part of a vision of people, just regular, ordinary folks, getting together to say, what do we want our future to look like? And then taking action in their local communities, and that extends to impacting our state and impacting national, even global policy. So today we would like to welcome a gentleman named Tom Polly. He grew up here in the Columbia area, now lives in Hallsville. He has been around. I'm going to kind of let him help fill in his story sketch here. He is running for the 44th District for the State House for Missouri, our Missouri legislature. And he can kind of describe what his district is. But some of you might be watching, and this might not be your district, but you might know friends or family members who do live in Tom's district. Or you might say, well, those are some questions and issues. I would like to find out what the candidate running in my district thinks about those issues. So we can learn about the issues as well as at least some of the candidates. And we want to remind you that Election Day is super important. It's 26 days away from the time we're taping this now. And so it's coming around very close, but we want to help educate people about these issues so that they can make an informed decision. And so we just ask you to, take your interest in this program and share it with your friends and family and pass on helping educate others. So I'd like to ask Mr. Polly, Tom,
thank you.
Yeah, to say thank you for joining People's Visioning. And
thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the issues. I think it's very important that we know what our elected officials or prospective elected officials think.
I mean, our vote is important, but an informed vote is what we mean when we say our vote is important, because it doesn't really help if we go and later on we find out we might have wished we'd have voted a different way.
Absolutely, and that's happened.
It does happen, so we're happy to have you help us also from your perspective to inform. And Mr. Polly, you have done so many things. Kind of on the way here, we were talking about a thumbnail sketch of your life. And I want to let you kind of hit some of the highlights, because I think when people know the wide range of experiences that you bring to the table as an elected official, that would be really important for them. I've personally felt very impressed to think that you have so much and such a wide range of experiences. And so we'll let that both inform us and then let it move into some of the issues.
Okay. Well, I'm a native Missourian, born in Independence, where my family lived until about 1957. Then we moved here into the central Missouri area. I love telling the story about living in Independence in the early 50s. We were not too far from downtown. My father knew a lot of people there, and he was a truck driver, and he would come home every few days and liked to take his little son to the barber shop. This was a kind of a father-son moment. And it was great. I just really enjoyed it. I didn't really know how much I was enjoying it, because all the fellows there were just really nice folks, and they all talked like my dad, the truck driver.
Yeah.
And there was one guy that also came in and was just, everybody really laughed at his jokes. He was really friendly, and he would occasionally come by our house. And when he did, I'd run out to say hi to him because he was my friend from Dad's barbershop. And my mother was always nervous because she was afraid I would say something to the President of the United States that I shouldn't.
And this guy turned out to be
Harry
the President
Truman,
of
that's
the
right.
United States.
Yes, and And of course, I think the thing that was really tragic about that, I've got pictures of every single aspect of my life when I was a little kid. My mom took pictures all the time. Do you think she'd get a picture of me with the president? No, that one just went on by.
So here we have someone who has actually been friends with one of our former presidents and one of our notable presidents too. So yeah, that's a great experience for any young person. And I think you were kind of telling me earlier about how some of your early educational experience, made you feel really attracted to doing politics, possibly, or the governing experience.
Sure. When you're exposed, and my father was very interested in politics. Obviously, you kind of get around on that. But when I was in grade school at Rockbridge Elementary School, south side of Columbia, the sixth graders always took a trip to Jeff City. And it was kind of the big deal. We sold candy and got to go to Jeff City and go tour the Capitol. And I remember that trip. That was one of those that, for a 12-year-old, it was very significant to me, because I remember looking at the pictures on the wall of all the past legislators and thinking, wow, did they ever come here as sixth graders, or how did they do it? How did because these guys, some from the 1800s, it had an impact on me that I don't know that I ever got over, and I've always had an interest and kind of a fascination with the legislative process.
I think it's really important, because some people kind of think that, I don't know, their lives are focused on other things, and maybe they don't think it's all that important, but I think more and more these days we're all beginning to see that these issues are impacting us, and we might need to become more involved in this process. And so we encourage people to start thinking about the fact that we have a responsibility in our democracy, in the way our governing works, to contribute, to educate ourselves, to at least go vote, and to recognize that we can't hold on to this freedom or democratic system if we don't participate in it, and it can get kind of overtaken by the people who do participate and show up. And if that's not the rest of us, then we're sort of giving away our influence in something that impacts our lives so tremendously. I think we're in a time where people are starting to wake up to that a little bit more.
I agree. I was very shocked. One of the things that happens when you become a candidate is you get to learn a lot about your district. And as a rule, generally speaking, each Missouri House district represents about 43,000 people. That's the goal, is to, on this particular reallocation of population, was about 43,000. Right. And in my district, in the 44th Legislative District, just over half of the 43,000 are registered to vote. And in the largest turnout in an election, which I believe was in 2008, just over half of those voted.
So it's a smaller percentage of us who really decide what's going on. And so if you want your life to be driven by yourself, you need to get out and vote. So we're really, encouraging people to get out and vote, because, otherwise you just give your power away.
Well, it's you're voting for three other people.
Right.
Every vote, people say that their vote doesn't count. Well, in reality, in this case, it's almost counting for three, because two people aren't even there. Not even in the game. And the other thing that when we talk about these, we watch the news and we see what's going on all over the world. In every corner of the world, people are fighting and dying for the right to make simple decisions at a ballot. And we have it in this country in the most orderly of fashions. Every 4 years or every 8 years, we have a complete administration change. There's been no riots in the street. We're
so lucky.
We're so lucky. And maybe that's why so many of our fellow citizens are complacent, because they know that the system will work, life will not change, things just go on, and they think they don't have an effect. In reality, they really do.
It's good to have the confidence in the system to some degree on the one hand, but on the other hand, some people think two things. I've heard people say, well, you know, my vote won't count. And so I've heard both, you know, well, it's okay without my vote and I'm okay with that. Or I've heard, well, I really don't like it, but then I didn't vote, you know. So it's like, well, we got to get out and vote. And they won't vote or didn't vote because they believed their vote didn't count.
That's true. And just to kind of add on to that, in the August primary, there was an issue on the ballot about farming.
Yes.
An issue that's going to have an effect on everything we do for years to come.
Yes.
And regardless of how you feel about it, there is an agreement that there are changes in the wind, and we will have to deal with that. I talked to one of the opponents of that, and we discussed the reality of it. As it turns out, if one person in every precinct across the state had voted no instead of yes, that amendment wouldn't pass.
Right.
So when you say your vote doesn't count, no, your vote can really make a difference.
Your vote does matter.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that our program, at least right now, as we've been dealing with some things that are policy that's really important on the plate right now, we've been really trying to impress on our viewers, and we're hoping that we reach some new people that maybe haven't been as interested before, and we hope that we'll help them to wake up to the situation. And I know when I first met you, we were showing a program to educate yet more, and this is available online, so you can look it up and watch it for free. We were showing Coke Exposed, or ALEC Exposed, and ALEC is ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, and there's another film called Citizen Coke as well. There's several documentary educational films about how actually, and because we haven't been participating, that's what's allowed it to happen. Our democracy actually is no longer a democracy. According to studies done out of Princeton to see where are we in this process, they say now we're an oligarchy, and an oligarchy essentially is a government that is controlled by the ruling elite of that country. And so that's what Princeton's studies has said that now America has. And so it's really important that we wake up and wake our friends up and say, I'm going to get down there and educate myself first and then vote, and we need to take our democracy back, or we might be looking like one of those countries you mentioned earlier, Tom.
I would.
I hope not.
I trust in the fact that we won't. I trust in the fact that this country has got a strong constitution, and that the public will realize that we need to step up. But
yes. And I think this kind of communication, so spread the word.
Yes, absolutely.
Power of the spoken word, word of mouth is really what the people here have to operate on, because that's one of the reasons we have lost this. There's so much money in our governance, and they can buy a lot of airtime, and because they kind of control the rule making now, they've made rules, they've elected court officials with these people that they've elected, then the rules they've made, and it keeps going kind of more and more in a certain direction that favors the 1% rather than the 99%. We might be watching this and say, well, I don't think I'm in that lower number, but you might want to check it out. You probably are. And so I want to get into some of the issues too now,
Sure.
but I do want to mention either now or at the end that you have a lot of experience across the board in many different areas. So
I've been a busy guy.
yes, you have been. And so I know that your first thing is education,
Yes.
that you are very interested in, and of course it's central to everything, because we can't even vote and hold our democracy if we don't have an educated populace. We can't get good jobs. We wouldn't have the freedoms that we have here without our good educational system that's available to everyone. So
That's true. What I've been looking at what has gone on in the state legislature, and there is a move to do away with free public education. There are a group of people that do not want to educate everybody. Well, this is,
or certainly not educate them at a par or a similar par.
absolutely. The consistent problem is reducing funding, trying to come up with schemes to keep teachers from teaching reality, but teaching to tests. There's some real issues involved. There's an amendment coming up on the November ballot that I encourage people, look closely at this. This will do away with local control of schools. Your school boards will no longer be in effect. All the rules for schools will be controlled by the state legislature. And even though I'm running for that body, I don't want that. We have school boards, and our local teachers know best how to teach their students. So I have some really concerns with that in that regard. The other thing that has gone on over the past several years, and primarily, I'm going to put this at the feet of the controlling party right now, the majority in Jeff City has continually underfunded the foundation formula. And rather than get into a lot of extensive mathematics on it, it's very simple. They had a formula, they apply it to the number of students, and that figures out the amount of dollars each school district gets. They revised that in 2005, but continue to underfund it.
So how can you have good education without the money to support it?
Exactly, a good education, a well-educated student body, our children being educated will solve a huge number of our problems. If you have well-trained students, if you've got students that are sharp and are on top of the classroom studies that we need to do, they will be a good workforce. I just talked to a gentleman that owns a construction company. His biggest problem is getting good workers. He needs workers that understand how to use a tape measure. And know basic math. He has trouble getting those, and it's going to get worse.
Right.
And so,
and people need good jobs, and so this education is clearly a vital part of being someone who's free to make the most of our human potential.
Exactly, and we never know which one of those students out there is going to be the one that has the spark. So we need to educate all of them. At the figures that I was able to come up from with the help of the Missouri Association of School Administrators is that currently the public schools are underfunded at about $1.4 billion every year. It's gotten worse and worse.
And you mentioned about the teachers amendment. Yes. I was reading a little bit about the amendment, and I agree with you that folks should think very carefully about it. It also limits the teacher's ability to impact how best to teach their students, like you said, the local control, but to even have any kind of union organizing against this top-down model of how they are then demanded to teach. And you were talking about, the student, we don't know which students have, the different capabilities, and I know that you've had a disabled child, and then you've had a child on the other end of the spectrum, and the whole range of students within your own family.
Yes.
And so it is very important to allow these teachers to really have a human interaction with their students, and I believe that while we have to have some standards, I think everyone understands that and wants to end up with good quality. I think, this rote teaching to the test is not producing the level of education we need. In fact, comparing our level of education to other countries, for a civilized nation or a developed nation, we are very low compared to many other countries. So it's
I won't quote a number, but it's like 33. I mean, it's incredibly low. And you're exactly right. When we have teachers are forced to teach to a test, then we end up with a population of test takers, but not problem solvers. And we need people that can solve problems. We need people that we need students that can come up with the ideas to solve problems, not just go, nope, this is question 2, that's got to be B. And then that's what's happening, because everything's tied to funding. If you don't get a certain level on these tests, then they're going to reduce your funding. And if they reduce your funding, then the next thing you know, they'll close your school, and then all the students will go to the neighboring school.
And it sets up a
snowball
culture too of maybe, when there aren't other avenues to engage in, it sets up a culture of this is the only way to excel or succeed, and so by whose definition, of course. And then, sometimes it introduces some ethics issues, and
Absolutely.
I'd like to move to that too.
Sure.
Because you have some conversation about that in your
platform. I'm a firm believer in that. One of the problems we have in this country, and I think one of the reasons that we don't have people show up to vote is they have lost their respect. They've lost their trust in legislators and lawmakers.
Confidence.
Yeah, they have no confidence. First off, let's talk about one of the things that I've noticed coming on for some time, and as a student of political science, this is an issue that, while it has been there all along, it has gotten to such a point that it's almost too far to bring back, and that's the negative campaigning. No matter what you do, no matter who you listen to, no matter which nationwide news broadcast you listen to or TV station, you're going to see negative ads about every candidate. So comes election day and you're going, well, I really don't want to vote for either of these people. They're both terrible. I saw this ad that says one thing and this ad says something terrible about the other. And everybody's like, well, that's just disgusting. That's terrible. And we've taken out the fact that this is how we govern. This is how we are able to do things, by finding the truth about people, not listening to lies.
And that's the thing. I know that because I do, you can probably tell, I study these things. And and while I don't watch a huge amount of TV, I do watch TV, and I see that, these ads, I would say to myself, gosh, if I didn't know better, I would really be convinced by this ad. And I know that while there's some truth mixed in there, there's a lot of untruth in that ad too. And so now we have, as I mentioned earlier in the program, these elected and appointed officials, the elected ones appointing oftentimes or approving the Supreme Court justice, for instance, in the Citizens United case that has allowed a lot more money into our governing system, which has made everything way worse. And that kind of takes us back to how I met you. And so if you have any conversation about that with the ethics, the money in these campaigns.
I'm glad you brought that up. One of the most disturbing facts that's going on currently in our state legislature, we are the only state in the union that has no limits on campaign contributions or gifts from lobbyists of any kind.
And that doesn't sound good to anybody who has common sense.
So gifts, ethics. Let's balance this. Last year, the Missouri State Legislature set a record for accepting the highest dollar amount of gifts ever recorded. Right at $1 million of gifts. For what?
What are these people taking gifts
for?
And does that maybe impact some outcomes we have in governance?
Why would a utility company spend $5,000 for steak dinners for a group of legislators?
Right.
What could they possibly want? And we have nothing in, and we used to have controls, and those controls have been removed. Yeah. And until we can get that back, until we can put some sort of common sense controls, and this is not easy, because one of the comments that I've heard is, well, you can't restrict freedom of speech. You're right, you can't. But let's define freedom of speech. Freedom of speech by our founding fathers was the fact that we could stand in a public place and espouse our views. We could talk about how we feel in public, in front of people. Of course, there were newspapers that printed things, and somewhat,
TV media,
but things could happen. But the simple fact was the idea that a person could say their opinion and have the right to say that, as long as it wasn't libelous or slanderous. You could do these things. Well, we've got away from that now. With these super PACs, people can contribute huge sums of money, unbelievable amounts of money, without any association to them at all. And they can hire people to say whatever they want, true or false, good or bad, about anybody, and they don't have to stand for it.
Right, so it sort of takes the voice away from the money. I mean, it detaches the ownership of that speech.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And this is why one of the things that I've kind of come up with in my campaign, and I've got to give a nod to my good friend John Wright. Him and I talked about this early on, and I've taken the pledge that I will not accept gifts from lobbyists. When I'm elected, no gifts.
I think that we need to elect more people. John, I'm glad to hear that. John Wright is another person. You might be in John's district.
Absolutely.
And there are a number of good folks out there running in these areas. So I don't want to go into those right now, but we could list some of our similar ones and maybe
Sure.
vote blue at the Blue Note. We
Oh,
can
yeah.
talk about that
Oh,
as
yeah.
far as like how we would fundraise money for
Well, and
from
that's-
small amounts of people.
Well,
But-
it's one
but
of
we
the-
need to elect people like you and John who would maybe decide to take us back away from that policy and put us back where we used to be,
Sure.
and say, and we as voters should say, why did we ever get away from that? You know, it makes sense.
Yes, it absolutely, and we got away from it because people with huge sums of money wanted us to get away from it. They
we
bought
should
their
just,
way around it.
And if we want to talk about the freedoms, the free speech thing, why don't we just say, okay, well, no money, everyone has the same free speech, period.
Right. Well, and
so we all
but
just,
everybody should. Everybody. We all only have one vote, and
Right.
all votes are exactly the same.
Right.
And our voices should be on a par. Just because you've got more money doesn't mean you get to speak louder.
Right.
And we need to worry
And
about
that's kind
that.
of how it is right now, and I think that's how some of the message certainly is skewed, and how
is.
some of the voters are duped, actually.
Yeah. Well, and we've got
without
other issues
researching.
too. But yeah, I would encourage all of our listeners today to take a look at what's going on out there, not just in my race, in everybody's race, because they still have to report the gifts.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you have to follow it a little bit harder, and you can find it, but it's all
can follow
public
the
record.
money.
Yeah, follow the money and the Ethics Commission reports, and it's all there. I encourage people to do that.
I'm going to touch on just a tiny little bit about energy, and then I want to
Oh,
move
great.
to women's issues and
Okay.
maybe close with Medicaid. But
Oh, excellent.
energy,
Energy, yeah.
just a little bit about that.
I am not so optimistic that everybody thinks we could just flip a switch. We cannot today go from fossil fuel and coal instantly. There is a process we have to go through. For us not to move in that process is one of the most foolish things I can imagine. Everybody
And to move strongly in that process.
strongly, absolutely. Pretty much everybody that I can imagine with any kind of common sense at all knows that fossil fuels and coal are a limited resource. Eventually, they will all run out. Why would we want to wait till the last shovelful of coal is put into that power plant to decide, wow, how are we going to do tomorrow?
And there are things that we use petroleum for that we might want to save a little bit of it for something else,
Sure.
maybe. And so beyond that, I think that with the finite fuels you just mentioned, and that would also include uranium for nuclear, et cetera. Those are all finite sources. Those sources, everything has a footprint and or a pollution component.
Mm-hmm.
But if we just looked at the amount of pollution, whether it be through our air or our water or soil, any of it, that mining these types of fuels just to burn, what that does to our environment, and because of that, and we'll talk about this a little more with the health issues, but it hugely impacts public health.
Well, and if it was just the pollution, if it was just the fact that we're putting CO2 in the atmosphere, when you dig the coal, when you destroy the ground, you release any number of other things. So it's not just the pollution. This is a huge thing, and we need to look carefully at this. And one of the opponents to this, the people say, oh, there's plenty of coal, it'll last forever. Well, no, it won't last forever, and you're just going to last for your lifetime. Is that all you care about? We don't care about our children and our grandchildren. Well, that's not me. I think that's another folly that too many people have gotten into. We need to see what we can do. And I think it's going to be imperative, and I think we'll find out in the future, not only can citizens do things, solar arrays on your home, being smart on how you use electricity in your home, being conservative in any number of ways, with water,
Right.
with electricity,
Right.
with all those things. Anything we can do personally, but the corporations that currently provide us with electricity, they could move toward that. We still would have to pay them for the service. They're not going to go out of business.
Right.
We just have to realize that
They can shift like we can shift.
exactly. We have to kind of look at a different way of doing it. And I think there's ways that the government can pass legislation that will
It's
help.
supportive.
Yeah, help soften the impact of that on the companies that claim this will waste jobs.
You know,
That's falling
retraining,
too.
job retraining, and these
Yeah.
sorts of things. And I know that I've seen charts that talk about, you know, the jobs created per, say, million or billion of investment in these different forms of energy supply. And from the least amount, which would be like about 2.5 or more, up to the higher numbers, which would be like in the 11 or 12 range, 2.5 or more to 11 or 12 jobs more per investment are created with these various other cleaner forms of energy. And so that would be, of course, wind and solar and tidal and maybe some transportation kinds of issues,
Sure.
you know, mass transit, these kinds of categories were compared. So
Well, and
it
as
creates more jobs and
Certainly.
it cleans up the environment and it provides for our future.
Well, and
Makes
we've
good
seen
sense.
that the photovoltaic cells have come down in price half of what they were 15 years ago, and technology is going to improve.
It's still going in the downward direction,
it's
where
going
the
to-
other stuff is going in the upward direction
Yeah.
as it, you know, shrinks in its.
Well, I think it
Yeah,
also
as
is
we use
helpful
more
when,
of it.
if we can put an emphasis on it. And part of it is, it's if we tell industry this is what we want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to do is, as a people, demand that we want this done.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go out there and we start saving energy and we start being conservative and thinking about what we're doing before we just throw stuff away, let's try to do that whole reuse,
Right.
recycle thing.
Yeah,
And,
conserve.
And if we do that, then
Conservation used to be conservative.
that's right. And but if the public does that, then government and industry will come along.
Yeah.
It's
The people have to lead, and
Well,
government will follow. Isn't
well-
that what you're kind of saying?
well, yeah, it is. I love the quote about, you know, it's like herding cats. You know, that is herding cats. That's a tough challenge. The trick is getting all the cats to chase the right mouse.
Yeah, that's
So
a good idea.
if you hold the right mouse in front of these utility companies and go, there's a mouse, they'll follow that, and the people drive that.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
That's a good one. So that kind of reminds me of, okay, I'm talking to a man who's had a lot of experiences to come up with this mouse idea. So anyway, because I like that idea.
Yeah.
So I want to move to the women's issues.
Sure.
And, you know, it kind of goes along with equality and other things that are happening in our state and nation, you know, with minorities. Women are in minorities, and minorities are, you know, encompassing multiple races and gender preferences, all of these things. So I just want to ask you to talk a little bit about equality and women's issues together.
Well, yeah, I am. If I remember correctly, the U.S. Constitution says all men are created equal. I don't really think that's exactly what they meant. They weren't being gender specific when they did that. All mankind, all humans are created equal.
I think that's what they meant.
I'm
yes.
pretty sure that's what they meant. There are a lot of people that like to twist that around. And anytime we do not give full and total consideration and individual rights to everybody, regardless of their religion, their sex, their sexual preference, their race, their color, their creed, their national origin, their religion, if any of those are key to cause them to be discriminated against, that is wrong. And we've got to stop doing that. And my campaign's built on the 3 E's: education, equality, and ethics. And I am, well, my wife reminds me on a regular basis how that women make between 75 and 83% of what a man makes per hour.
Right.
Interestingly enough.
For the same job.
For the same job.
Sometimes better, maybe, you know, I don't know. But at
on
least
the
roughly
average,
the same job.
Yeah. I always like to remind her that when I was a sheet metal worker, I spent 23 years as a union sheet metal worker.
Okay.
And
Among other things.
Among other things.
Many, many other
But
things.
that was a good living. There were times that there were women that worked with us in the field, women welders who were just incredibly good, talented people. Guess what? At the end of the week, their check was the same as mine. There was equality there
in the union.
in the union.
She,
Yeah, but you move out of that, and I always thought, well, why not? They're doing the same work.
Yeah.
Why would that be different? I guess I just didn't realize.
and a lot of legislators are not voting to support, equality, equal pay for equal work. And, at our national level, it's been voted down to protect women from violence in terms of women's issues.
But that's another equality.
It
People need to
is.
be equally free from the threat of violence.
Right.
But of course, part of that is that all of us have to.
And all of these things have to do with our freedoms for the folks that say, well, it's about free speech or it's about freedom. Well, these are exactly that,
That's
about
right.
freedoms.
And that's exactly right. And it's not just the freedoms that you want; it's the freedoms for all of us, because we're all here. My mom used to say, "We're all God's children."
Yes,
So-
yes. And so we have to behave that way and love one another, I think we were told.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage folks to help Tom's campaign. I want him to tell us about some more about him. Will come out here about Blue Vote at the Blue Note. And so I want to encourage folks to not only help Tom's campaign, but also to get in touch with People's Visioning, and we can help connect you with Tom and other campaigns, both with financial donations, but also a lot of folks may not have financial donations, and there's more you can do, door to door and phone banking, and those kinds of things. So, and in the meantime, we can all, start chatting up, these issues. But please tell us about
Blue Vote at
some
the
more
Blue
about
Note.
yourself.
One of the things that keeps me busy from time to time is I'm a musician. I play bass and I sing, and I have loved doing this for years. Been involved with my church choir.
Which took you to Carnegie Hall, as I heard.
Yes.
This guy is very interesting.
I've had some really incredible experiences, and it's been really great. But what we're doing on the 14th of November at the Blue Note, my good friend Richard King has been kind enough to help us put this together. Him and another good friend, Jeff Bush, owns the Blue Guitar, is helping me bring some musicians together. So for students, it's $10. There's going to be food. There's going to be lots and lots of music. We've got
Great music.
great music. One band from St. Louis, 3 local Columbia bands, mid-Missouri area bands, and then we've got several gifted individuals that are going to come in and, it looks like it may be a jam session.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Well, there's a good, and I think one of the things
We can
is
hear
that
this Carnegie Hall voice. And when is it?
it's going to be the 14th of October. That's a Tuesday. The doors open at 6 o'clock. Music's going to start shortly thereafter. And we're not sure, other than the fact that we have to leave at 1:30. We're going to just play until people are tired of playing.
Sounds really fun.
Well, I'm excited because there's a lot of people that are going to show up that, with or without part of the other members of the bands they're currently with, but who are looking forward to playing music with people they don't normally get to play with.
I think the jam session sounds awesome.
Well, I'm excited.
I think those things are sometimes even more fun than than actual
I-
performances that are set.
It is. It's kind of when the magic happens.
Yeah.
So I look
yeah.
forward to that. So.
Yeah, that's kind of what what you just said. It takes me back to thinking about our governance and our diversity, and how when we all kind of come together and work together, the magic happens. And that's kind of what People's Visioning is about. These ethics and these equality things, and seeing the direction that things go in our communities, and who these policies do and don't favor, and what sort of direction that we've been. So just urge everyone to get involved, learn more, and make this magic happen for their own communities. People are looking to start People's Visionings in other communities. They're hearing about what we're doing here and would like to do that, so we're helping them. If anyone has an interest in that, you can contact us. You'll be able to find out how on the screen here, but also we have a Facebook group, and that's probably one of the best ways. And so I want to close by talking a little bit more about ALEC and the American Legislative Exchange Council. What happens, I think they were really a big part of that farm amendment that you mentioned earlier. the right to farm, and kind of takes me to the idea of the right to vote and the right to unions, the right to work is what it's called, which really actually makes it harder to work for a good wage, like we mentioned with the unions, what opportunity it brought for the equality with the women's wages because of the union. And not just that, but all of us have both a prevailing wage, whether you're in a union or not, that's kind of somewhat dovetails and links to what, within a range, what the union workers can make for their trained quality. And also these workplace safety concerns, things like our weekends that really celebrate our human freedoms because we're not slaves to work 7 days a week. So it's still about freedom and equality and jobs. And so I'd like to visit a little bit about what you know about American Legislative Exchange Councils, sort of dampening some of that, or its ties to Kochs or Sinkfeld, if there are, or what goes on in our own state legislature that you might know about within the context
There's
some of these policies.
ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange.
The right to farm.
Yeah, they have, and I'm not sure why it is that every time the piece of legislation starts with the word "right to," be careful, because the chances are real good that that's not what it means. There seems to be some sort of shift, some sort of devious motion.
Kind of a languaging trick.
It is a languaging trick. And when we talk about these things, and one of the things that ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and which we haven't talked about, is the Affordable Care Act. And the right to
and Medicaid,
the Medicaid expansion. They have been fighting that. And between that and this right to farm, that issue, this teachers issue on the ballot that's coming up in November, that's an ALEC driven. Yes, and they seem to have a tendency to want to try to do away with unions, do away with public schools, and do away with programs that help the infirm or the disadvantaged. And they have a tendency to help the rich. It's like, is there a connection here?
Right, and so also while we're talking about votes, the right to vote has been, it's been passed in some states, some different legislation that actually makes it harder to vote.
Yes.
Takes away the votes, like you were saying, disadvantaged people. It makes it harder for elderly people who maybe don't have an ID, the driver's license thing and such, but have voted for years, then they find they now can't vote. And so, and they say, well, it's to prevent voter fraud, and so they've done studies now about that, and the voter fraud is pretty minuscule. But yet now we're defrauding a lot of other people from their right to vote. So we're talking about the freedoms and the rights. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a languaging trick that folks should start to look into a little bit more. And yeah, talk about, I read that I don't know if you know these numbers, you might, but I read there was $8.4 billion that we were saying no to, is our money. That's our Missouri taxpayer money that we're saying no to by not accepting the Medicaid expansion that is linked to the Affordable Care Act that is dubbed Obamacare. So,
and we can call it Obamacare because, from what I understand, the president's fine with that.
Yes, he's fond of it even.
He is fond of it, which really kind of upsets some of the folks on the other side of the aisle. But the Affordable Care Act, without getting into a lot of details, let's talk about that for just a little bit. The states all have the right to decide how they want to utilize the Affordable Care Act. And in many states, they've set up their own market exchange, their own marketplace or exchange, and they're doing very well. The way it works, the Affordable Care Act, and I guess I can speak on this with a little bit of authority. I'm a licensed insurance agent, and I sell life and health insurance, and I sell Affordable Care Act insurance. So that's what my job is. And
so he knows about this.
I know about this.
Among many other things I found.
But the Affordable Care Act basically covers people from around $13,000 a year. If you make $13,000 a year, you pay enough income taxes that instead of taking the taxes and put it into the government, they take your taxes and apply it to your health care. And it's a sliding scale that goes up depending on the number of people in your family and depending on the income you have, and you can afford health care. I've gotten
Variable factors. there.
variable factors. And I've gotten health care for people that were never able to get it for a couple of reasons. One, pre-existing conditions are now no longer included. So if you have an issue that would have prevented you from getting affordable health care in the past, that's gone away.
So in the
So that's-
pre-existing conditions that would impact people that say, for instance, maybe a family had a child who had asthma, and the father changed jobs, and now he isn't insured there, now he has to get some different insurance, but this child with the pre-existing asthma now isn't going to be covered. And
Yeah.
the same thing for things like maybe a woman's, or, breast, any kind of cancer.
Any
or,
cancer,
any of these things.
hypertension, diabetes.
Maybe even depression, I don't know.
Well, yes, those are there. Also, the Affordable Care Act includes certain annual physicals, and the dental insurance would cover checkups and things like this. So you can go
So-
in and get preventative medicine and preventative
That's
care
great.
that helps you find a problem before it gets to be severe.
And really, that's investing wisely, because people find that with preventive care, much less is needed on the other end of the spectrum. Plus, you have a much better, higher quality of life.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to say a little something about, I kind of forgot what I was going to say, but
Sorry.
no, that's okay. It was, maybe it'll pop into my head in a minute. But I think that also the number of jobs that would be created, and it would also keep smaller hospitals that are the rural doctors and rural hospitals open,
Correct.
because we would have more money in our healthcare system. Also things, and I'll mention Ebola, not to scare people, but we have different kinds of diseases, whether it might be avian flu or AIDS or Ebola or any of these sorts of things that are larger pandemic potentials. And so we do need to have an investment in our health care system and keep it strong, instead of, the small government break it down kind of thing.
I've heard numbers as high as 30,000 jobs in Missouri.
Because if
Because
we
of
would
this.
expand Medicaid.
We're losing those jobs.
Right.
There are now small rural hospitals that are closing wings. I was told, and I don't know this for sure, but I was told that in Moberly, in Randolph County, the hospital up there is considering closing one of their emergency units. And that means if you're injured on a farm in northern Randolph County,
You have to go a lot further.
Now you have to get the helicopter from the med center, which is an hour away.
And a lot more expensive.
A lot more expensive.
You know.
The other thing, and I know we've got so many things, but I want to touch on this because I think it helps bring this
Things
healthcare
together.
issue together. As an agent for affordable healthcare, one of my projects is, or one of my jobs is to help people find healthcare. I was contacted by a young lady, and she's a single mother, 3 children, and out of an abusive relationship, the father's gone, and so she's on her own working 2 jobs as a waitress, trying real hard to keep things together. Her children are covered by Children Medicare. They're covered, so they have health care. It's somewhat limited, but they do have health care. Something. The only health care she has is if she's injured on the job. So
And that's all-
that's workman's comp.
Yeah,
And that's
she
it.
can't afford anything, or
So
couldn't.
she couldn't, no. And so she came to me and said, I need health care. I'm very afraid about this. Also, she was concerned that if you don't have health care by the end of 2014, there would be a fine on your income tax. So we sat down and we spent a couple hours trying to find out what we could do. And when we got to the end of it, I told her, I said, well, you don't make enough money to qualify for financial aid. And I had to stop for a minute because I just said those words. It's like, you don't make enough money to qualify for financial aid? How does that happen? As it turns out, because we failed to expand Medicaid, that expansion would have covered these people. She would have gotten the health care she needs. She wouldn't have to be worried about this.
But because
So-
we didn't.
Because we didn't, she
Now
doesn't get
she's-
it. Well, here's the part that was really sad. I told her this, and she was really just didn't know what to do. She said, and she's obviously distraught. And I said, well, what's wrong? She goes, I can't afford that fine. And I said, the fine? She goes, I can't afford $95. And I stopped for a minute. I'm going, oh, well, here, I've got a form that comes with this. When you do your income taxes, you won't have to pay that. She got tears in her eyes because I saved her $95.
And that's the thing, you know, there are a lot of people who every dollar matters to.
It's huge. And
There are many of us watching this program who can relate to this story. Some of us sitting here aren't so far away from that.
this is one of the things. You have experiences in your life, and they make decisions. The Koch brothers movie, yeah, that was one. But when I had to tell that mother of three that I couldn't help her because she didn't make enough money to get qualified for this, but I was able to save her $95, and she cried with gratitude
For just that.
for this. Then when my opponent says, well, I haven't seen the right plan yet. Really? What plan would that be? The one where we're not losing $8.3 billion? Where we're not losing 80 people a month that are not getting health care? What perfect plan are we waiting for?
Well, I bet Tom would go down there and make a good plan. But let me say this. I will say, too, some people might think, well, you know, we can save the federal budget if we don't take that money. But the money is going to other states if we don't take it.
Iowa, Arkansas, Illinois, all three have got great plans. They're using our money. Kentucky, one of the strongest Republican states, has set up a marketplace that is incredible. People in Kentucky are getting wonderful health care.
So we just need to move forward on this Medicaid thing and help our citizens, only because if nothing else, it's the right thing to do. Yeah. But it makes so much sense in these other economic areas as well.
We need to quit playing politics with people's lives.
That's
the reason really we have not done this in this state is because the leadership in Jeff City does not want our president to have a victory. It's plain and simple. They say they're waiting for a perfect plan. What a load of hooey. Sorry.
And when you know people kind of wrongly think or say, right, whether they knew it or not, that you know their position would be, well, we need to balance the budget, you know, so we don't want as a state to take that money because it needs to go and you know balance the budget. We just need to know that that just isn't quite right because the money is not going to be. If we save it, it's not going to go against the budget. It's going to be divided with the other states that are accepting it. Yeah. And they'll just cover more of their own people, which we're happy for. But, you know, we need to be happy for our own neighbors, too. So let's do something here for them also. And I think that really would be a great place to end our interview. And just want to just remind everyone to, you know, it's so important. I hope that you're learning by watching these People's Visioning programs how important our participation in our government and governance is. Sometimes we might think, oh, you know, politics is, you know, it's tainted. You know, somebody buys up somebody, and they're always doing the negative ads and all that. But you know, we've got to, and we can pull it back from that. We can raise the bar on the conversations. We can raise the bar on the, you know, reestablishing the old laws that were done away with under, you know, maybe a false pretense, essentially, if you're going to say, well, it was because of freedom. Well, you can see it's not resulting in better freedom. So I think that there's, you know, just think about it. It's a good argument.
I agree. And I think this is why I alluded to it earlier about the pledge of not taking gifts. Until we can come up with a plan to reinstall ethics in the state legislature, all we can do is elect people that give their pledge to be ethical. Somebody's not going to have to buy me lunch to pass a bill. If there's a good piece of legislation, let's talk about it. I'll buy my own lunch, thank you. You know, I'd rather not be bribed or be beholden to somebody for something like that. Let's talk about doing things that are good for the state.
Sounds great. And so we're going to close by just reminding you, we'll put on the screen how you can contact Tom Polly. It's
Blue Note at the Blue Vote.
Yeah. We want to remind you about, Blue Vote at the Blue Note.
Yeah.
Tom's running as a Democrat. And so that's on October 14th, Tuesday, starts at 6 p.m. And then you've got your website.
Pauley44.com.
Pauley44.com, and it's Pauley 44. And as far as people...
And my email is there, tom@pauley44.com.
And
please,
phone number, contact me.
There's a way to get a hold of me. Please do. Let's talk about this on the webpage or some of the issues broken down a little more compressed than we have here. We're looking forward to talking to people and interacting.
So show up and help Tom and spread the word, find out who some of the other candidates are that are thinking like Tom, and join us also on our Facebook group, People's Visioning, and you have to put the apostrophe at the end of the S, because many people own the visioning, and we were talking about education today, and I guess it's just one of those tiny little sticky sort of punctuation rules, but it's PEOPLES apostrophe, visioning on Facebook groups. We'd love to have you join our Facebook group and maybe help you get a People's Visioning started in your community. And you can find out more about us. One of our co-sponsors, and I want to try to mention as many as I can remember because I don't have my little list here. We've got about 10 of us. But in closing, I want to thank all of them as well. But one of those co-sponsors, ColumbiaClimateChangeCoalition.org, hosts some space for us on their website. So you can find a little more about People's Visioning activities there too. And some of those co-sponsors are, again, Columbia Climate Change Coalition, the Democracy for Missouri, which is part of Democracy for America, Boone County Smart Growth Coalition, Food Not Bombs, Native American Support Group. We have moved to amend in the mid-Missouri area. We have the People's Visioning Mizzou group that's trying to get started, and I know that's not 10 people, so I'm leaving out some of them. So go to our website to make sure that you see everyone who is supporting us to bring People's Visioning to you. And thank you, Tom, for coming here and joining us and for running.
Thank you so much.
It's a service. Thank you.
I appreciate you helping me get the word out.
Okay,
Thanks so much.
great to have you.